Bible together every night. We don't do that. I mean, we're not. I don't want to put ourselves off as religious people because we're not. I wish we were more, but we're not. But we do have that in our background, and I think it's part of the fiber. You know, it's an interesting thing. Mariska Hargitay's husband, Peter Herman, said, people, if you get married thinking the other person is going to make you happy, you're going to fail. The other person won't make you happy. What you're going to find happiness in what you build together. And that's so true. You know, I can't expect him to take the burden of making me happy or vice versa. But the happiness does come of what you build together. And that's what we felt about all the couples that we interviewed, that they really had built a life together.
And they wanted the marriage. We could immediately see that. Marriages that last are unions between two people who really want the marriage, who maybe need the marriage. And
marriage counseling.
If somebody in the marriage wants to go to marriage counseling, I think after all these interviews, that is the ultimate act of love. I mean, that's a person that really wants the marriage to last.
And Bryan Cranston and his wife, Robin Dearden, they said that they don't go to marriage therapy for a referee. They go for an interpreter. They need somebody to say, no, that's not what he meant by that. This is what she meant. This is what he meant. That it helps them, you know, understand what the other one is thinking. Because so many times, you know, we have a argument with someone and it's not really what the other person meant. And it takes a lot of fighting and days to go through till you finally realize, oh, that's what you meant. But so that's what they get from the therapist. Ron Howard and his wife, Cheryl, Neil Patrick Harris and his husband, David Burka. Many people, many of the couples went to marriage counseling because they wanted the marriage, as Phil said. They wanted it to last. I love what Kira Sedgwick said. She said, when you get married, there can be no plan B. That's it. And they got married. She was only 23 years old. But she knew right then that there's no plan B. You're going to stick it out. You're going to work it out. And these people did not run for the exit sign when things got tough. And everybody's marriage, everybody's life has challenges that you could never have imagined. You know, sickness and loss of money and loss of job and loss of house and all kinds of things.
There is no such thing as a constantly smooth marriage. Sooner or later, the big challenges are going to come. And it's really, I find that, or we discovered that the marriages that last were marriages that were able to almost anticipate problems. Lori Schellenberger was married to the captain who landed the plane in the Hudson River.
Oh, well, Sully, right. Yeah.
Sully, yeah. The world fell on her house.
Yeah. I mean, their life was completely upside down.
You can't. How do you plan for that?
And it was scary. Well, how do you plan for Kira and Kevin Bacon lost all of their savings, 30 years of savings in the Bernie Madoff scandal. You know, Michael J. Fox and Tracy Pullen, 3 years into marriage, he got the Parkinson's diagnosis. That's a lifetime disease. You know, these things happen. Jesse Jackson wandered outside of the marriage, had a baby with another woman, and his wife took him back. And she said an interesting thing. She said, this marriage is a strength of my character. That is because I have the character to be able to deal with this and keep my marriage. You know, I said to her, well, a lot of women would just throw him out. She said, well, he's not going anywhere. He's my man.
And she brought some humor to it. I mean, I really.
She calls him Reverend.
Yeah. She said that when people ask her how many children they have, she says, I have five. The Reverend has 6. So, I mean, you know, he belongs to me, she said. very, very authoritatively. And she meant it, and he did.
And you know, one of the things we learned too, and that we've been working on ourselves, is to try not to make the other person feel bad that they're not more like you, you know, and that you are trying to constantly, you know, get them to be more like you or get them to change the way they do something. And Judith Viors, who's a wonderful author, she said, and they've been married 60 years. She said, no matter how hard you try, he's never going to be you, and you're never going to be him. So just take that as a given and start to accommodate all the ways in which you two are different from each other. And that's a wonderful piece of advice, really wonderful piece of advice. It's not about accepting what you don't like or compromising, it's accommodating it. You know, he and I, we have very different personalities, as you can tell. I talk a mile a minute. But I am very impulsive. When there's a problem, you know, I'm running for the phone to find a solution. And Phil is laid back. He's looking over the environment and the landscape and trying to figure out what's the best thing. Now, sometimes that really annoys me that he isn't jumping to it. And it annoys him that I'm jumping too fast to it. So we've had to negotiate that. And sometimes, so now that we've been together so many years, we can look at it and say, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe Phil's right. We should step back on this. Or sometimes we'll say, okay, well, maybe you're right. Let's just go for it. So we've learned to accept it without fighting the other person. But every now and then we realize that maybe they do have a better way. Maybe this is one of those instances where we should jump in. So it takes some confidence and trust in the other person to be able to do that.
When you set out to write the book and to talk to these couples, how did you decide on the couples that you chose? It would seem, because it's so, you mentioned many different scenarios just a minute ago, and it just strikes me, you sort of, I don't know how conscious or unconscious this was, of really hitting everything, of people who had Jamie Lee Curtis and addiction issues, or issues in their marriage, or people who same-sex marriages, or it's really interesting of how you really went all over the board.
Well, we certainly didn't know. We didn't pick them according to their problems. I didn't know that Jamie Lee Curtis had been a drug addict, or that David Burka was an alcoholic, or we didn't pick them according to their problems. We thought about a couple of things.
Well, they couldn't be married for a day and a half.
Yeah, we wanted them to be married over 20 years. And then we, as we got going, we thought, well, let's get a couple of couples who've been married maybe 18 to 20 years or 17 to 20 years, just so we get a younger point of view. But we started with Jimmy Carter at 70 years and Alan Alda at 60 years and Billy Crystal at 50 years. And then we started moving down to 40 and 30. So one of the requirements was that they be married a long time. And then we also were looking for different professions: athletes, actors, comedians, authors, politicians. We wanted to understand, you know, even like Sullenberger, he's an airline pilot. You know, how do these, and the same-sex marriages, we thought that was important. You know, how do they do it? We also wanted a lot of religions. There's Christians and Jews, Muslim, Baptist. We wanted to hear how that worked. Also, Black, white, brown, Asian, Indian, just to see, you know, how does marriage differ with any of these things? You know, does race matter? Does same-sex, opposite sex matter?
And the Guinness World Record couple.
Yeah.
In Austin.
Right. They've been married 80 years.
Henderson?
Henderson, uh-huh.
Yeah.
They're in the Guinness World
80
Record.
years, hello.
Yeah. We heard about them.
You're halfway there.
Well, the book was all done, and we heard about them. It's okay, let's go talk to them. So I think that was it. We wanted to get a good, you know, feel across the whole landscape of differences. And the interesting thing is that there really isn't any different goal. Everybody who's married gets married because they want to have a safe place. They want to be with somebody who loves them and has their back and who they love and who they invest their desires and their dreams into. You know, it's very important to me that Phil get what he wants out of life. And it's very important to him that I get what I want. And we don't allow other people to rain on each other's parade. We really are each other's cheerleaders. And I think that's, you know, very, very important. It's good to know I've got somebody that's behind me, that's my cheerleader. Tell them the great thing that James Carville said.
Well, it sounds corny, but we found it very useful. When you and your spouse find yourself arguing around and around about what will turn out to be a very Mickey Mouse problem, Carville said what they do is, or what one of them will do, he will say, let's kick that can down the road. And they got a lot of cans, don't they, in there?
He said every successful marriage has a lot of cans. So we kind of wondered, well, that's interesting. Then we came off the road and we were going around and around in one of those things where you said you would, but you didn't do it. But I said, you would, blah, 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 round and round and round. And at one point, Phil looked at me and said, oh, let's just kick this can down the road. And we started laughing and realizing that, yeah, this is a dumb argument. It's the kind that can go on for hours and means nothing. He didn't close the door. I said, I would. You didn't do it. You said, whatever it is, it just goes on and on. And that's a very good tool. It's like saying, don't sweat the small stuff. But somehow by saying, let's kick it down the road, kind of gives you the feeling that, you know, if it's really important, it'll come back. But it's not important. Most arguments that you have are really not that important. And they kind of start to get some momentum of their own. You know, once you get going with it, you almost can't stop. And it takes some growing up to get over that. And so there's little things like that that people told us. That there's another, with all of this, you know, how do you fight? How do you come back from a fight? Who's the one that crosses the desert and says, let's make peace? Those are very important tools, you know, and
does one person pout? I'm pretty good at that.
Oh, yeah, I am too, Phil. Oh God.
I mean,
yeah.
I never pout.
You don't pout?
I
pout.
If you pouters leave a lot of unresolved problems. But it comes naturally to some of us.
But I've had to deal with that because I'm not a pouter. I'm like, let's get it on the table. Let's talk about it. Let's go. And it used to make me very angry. I thought his pouting was hostile. He was shutting me out. I had all these ideas of what it was. It took me maybe 10 years to realize, no, he has to have a little time to get through it. I don't. I mean, I'm annoying in the way that I can, you know, full up like a sandstorm, and then it's over for me. I'm on the next thing. So that could be annoying too. Like you did all this and now you're fine. So, you know, you have to learn each person's personality is just, that's who he is. So I've learned to like, okay, let him do it. Let him go in the other room and go through his process. And about 20 minutes later, he'll either come to me in my study and say, okay, I'm sorry. Or I'll go to him and say, are you over this now? I mean, can we talk about this? So yeah. We've learned to deal with it, you know, we've learned to deal with it.
Well, and don't you think, Phil, because I go into the pouting category, but don't you think that a lot of it is just that also that, I don't know, I learned very early in my marriage, I'm just really bad at fighting. Well, maybe it's an Irish Catholic thing. I don't know. I'm just not very good at it.
Well, you know, all our wars are happy and all our songs are sad. So they say of the Irish.
Yeah.
So,
How does that answer that question?
I'm not sure, but
You just like the saying.
well, it certainly speaks to the Irish
Yeah,
culture.
right.
And
No, to answer your question, Phil was not a good fighter when we first met. He would have an explosion. He has a temper, as do I. He'd have an explosion, and then he had to go sit somewhere while he processed out of it, which I found very difficult because I have an explosion, and then, then I'm ready to talk about it. So that was hard. And we had to get through that and learn how to fight. I think I taught you how to fight a little bit better.
probably,
Yeah.
yes, probably so.
I know. In my family, I'm half Italian and half Lebanese. There's nothing left on the table in my family.
Right.
Everything's,
Yeah.
it's all out there. I think it's way healthier, don't you think?
Oh yeah, you get it out, get it out, put it on the table, argue about it. Is a lot healthier than letting it sit and stew silently for a long time. That makes it more difficult to get out of it.
Right.
So we're learning after talking to 40 couples.
What is it Viola Davis said? Should you go into marriage thinking it's 50-50?
And it isn't. It's 100.
That's right.
And
everybody has to give 100%. And it's true. I don't know that everybody goes into marriage. I don't even know. I mean, we certainly didn't, knowing not that it's a lot of work, but it's a lot. I wouldn't call it work. It's a lot of learning about yourself and the other person. You're not going to be the same person a couple of years into marriage. You yourself are going to start moving your own self around. He can't tell me to do that, and I can't tell him to do that. But you start to see yourself that it's no fun to be in a place of tension. I don't want to be in a place of friction. I love this guy. I like him. I want us to be together and have some fun. I don't want it to be, dark and upsetting. So you need to grow up and take responsibility. Ted Danson, this is his third marriage to Mary Steenburgen, and they've been married over 30 years, and they're a terrific couple.
Yeah, it's not his third marriage to her.
No, it's his third marriage.
Third marriage.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
To be to her.
Right, and it's her second marriage. And I said to him, "What made you have the optimism to get married a third time? I mean, it took me my whole life to get married once." And he said, "Well, I knew I had to change things about myself. And one of the things I had to change was I had to stop lying." I thought that was so deeply honest of him. And I said, "Well, what did you lie about?" He said, "Everything. First of all, I cheated on my other wives. I lied about that. But I also lied about what I was feeling and who I was, because I wanted to be somebody better than I thought I was. So I pretended to be this other person, that I was this sort of white knight on a white horse that, was in charge and everything." He said, "And I'm really not that person. I'm way more vulnerable than that."
When I was a kid, Artie Shaw was the sinner. He was married many times.
8 times.
Is that right?
Yeah.
8 times. And finally, he wound up on my show. And a woman in the back row raised her hand, got up and said, "Mr. Shaw, why have you been married so many times?" And he said, "When I walk into a crowded room, I will head straight for the woman who will make me the most miserable." So,
But my version of that, when Phil told me that story, I said the only common denominator in all those 8 marriages is him. He's the reason. I don't think those women were so miserable. He was the reason. People get married over and over and over again, and they make the same mistakes, and they never get out of their own way. They never, ever go to a counselor, talk it out. I mean, if he'd gone to one counselor, if he'd bothered to look inside himself and see, what am I doing? Which is what Ted Danson said. Why do all my relationships end up the same way?
And
the reason is because he was lying about everything. He figured that out.
Breaking up is a lot more draining and complicated than making it work. Who said that? Elsa Walsh?
Elsa Walsh. Bob Woodward's wife. You know Bob Woodward, who wrote The President and all those wonderful books. She said, I don't understand this impulse to disruption. You know, she said, people spend so much time and drive and work.
And lawyers.
And lawyers to break up their marriage. You know, if they would put that much energy into keeping it together, then they'd really have something. But people get scared, I think. They think they're not up to the challenge. You know, am I up to the challenge of a sick husband? Am I up to the challenge of losing a job? You know, they get afraid. And they can't, it's all of a sudden not rosy. And so they look for the escape route. And that's why half of us get divorced. But I think if you stick with it and go through the fire together, when you come on the other end, you've really got something.
Including more energy.
Right. And I think you do make something really strong. It's made out, it's like a braid of love and experience and fun and pain and sex and, you know, good restaurants and all that stuff. It's so important that it's made of steel by the time you're through, you know, that I hate to jinx my own marriage, but I don't really think that there was anything that could come between us because we're pretty solid. I'm sorry, honey. What did you want to say?
Oh, it's not important.
Oh, come on.
You said speaking of.
You know what's really draining, energy draining, is jealousy. Jealousy will, I mean, you'll lose weight if you're jealous. The story we heard.
Well, what about you? Talk about yourself.
Well, I am jealous.
We'll tell about
she made a movie with Chris Christopherson,
who's gorgeous.
And thank you. They had a love scene in the movie, and I thought the damn love scene lasted 3 days. You know,
it was 4 minutes.
And what about
Kelly Ripa and Mark Consuelos? Mark was in Boston making a movie. Kelly was in New York. They had been married a short while, and it was before cell phones, and he couldn't reach her. Kept trying to reach her all day long. He couldn't reach her, which just bothered him. Finally, got a hold of her in the early evening at a home phone, and he said, "What are you doing tonight?" And she said, "Oh, since you're not here, I'm going to clean the house. I'm going to clean the toilets. I'm going to have a night where I could just really get my Johnny Mop and do everything I want to do." So he thought that sounded fishy. So he hopped a plane, didn't tell her, from Boston to New York, and then what? Tell the rest.
Well, he arrives at their apartment building.
Right.
He tells the doorman to not to call her or to
tell her she had flowers.
Right.
He told the doorman, tell her there's a flower delivery. So she opens the door.
He goes up. He sees her at the door, runs down the hallway, and runs past her into their private quarters. And he's looking around for the tall, dark stranger that he's now convinced is hiding behind the drapes.
And she's looking for the flowers. She thinks she's getting flowers. It was so funny. And so his jealousy, made him leave his movie set and get on an airplane and try to trap his wife, and he said, "I'm so embarrassed by that," and she said, "Well, he did that a couple of times. And then finally he just stopped, having these fantasies that I was, running off with somebody or somebody was in the house." And it is. I think men are more jealous than women.
That's possible. I haven't taken the survey, but
Well, let
it-
me just ask a question about that. I do want to, for our audience and people who are watching, if you'd like to use the chat and write a question, we have time for those, about 20 minutes or so. So now would be a good time to start those, and we'll get right to them. But let me just ask you on this idea of jealousy, because you were talking about the love scene with Chris Christopherson. But Marlo, Phil, at the height when he's doing the show, every day walked into a studio of probably 500, mostly women, who just thought he was a rock star. Did you ever feel any of that?
Yeah, sure. He had Sophia Loren on, and she called him the next day and asked him to lunch. And I was in New York, he was in Chicago. We were commuting in those years, the first years of our marriage. And he said to me, Sophia Loren called me and asked me out to lunch. What do you think? And I said, well, she did the show yesterday. If she wanted to have lunch with you before she did the show, I would understand that, because she kind of would want to warm you up and get to know you a little bit so it would be more comfortable. But if she wants to see you after the show, I don't think that's a good idea. And he said, yeah, I thought so too. So he didn't go. But I mean, I did not want my husband going to lunch with Sophia Loren. Not at all. No. I mean, sure. And also, he met me. We fell in love on his show. So I thought every now and then, well, what if he had another woman that he fell in love with too? But you know, you get over that after a while. But you do have those thoughts, of course. I mean, he's handsome. Women loved him. And the great thing, you know, Phil had a tremendous connection to his female audience, because he never talked down to them. He always, you know, brought on the most important issues of the day, you know, whether it was Milton Friedman with economics, or Ralph Nader with consumers' rights, or Gloria Steinem, or the birth of a baby, an actual abortion, Madeleine Murray O'Hair. I mean, he had everybody. And, you know, and opposite him was, you know, Monty Hall with a woman dressed like a chicken salad sandwich. So it was amazing that he just did what he wanted to do. And it's amazing that the American woman, who was the basic audience at 9 a.m. in the morning, she wanted it. She wanted this kind of news. They learned a lot, you know. I used to say it was like being married to a gynecologist. Women were always asking him questions. I mean, they were so fascinated by, you know, the subjects that he brought. And Phil was also in television in a time when it really had some meat to it. I mean, he would have one person for an hour, whether it was Marlo Thomas or it was somebody like Milton Friedman talking about economics. It would be a whole hour. So you really you got to know the subject, you know, and that also is interesting.
All right, let's go to some questions here in our time together. And Rachel, you can help me on this and get Emily.
Yes,
up,
Emily,
can...
you can go ahead and unmute yourself. And if you're having trouble with that, I'll also, there you go.
No,
you are set.
I'm a total Zoom professional at this point. I just wanted to first say, Marlo, you were such a role model for me in That Girl. I was newly married and I watched it all the time. And I married my high school sweetheart. We just celebrated our 50th anniversary last
Wow.
Whoa.
So, and Free to Be, I'm sharing with my grandkids now. It's so wonderful.
Thank you
for all of that you've done. And Phil, I think the comments that Joe just made about your show and that Marlo made, you know, it was a really substantive show, and we don't have that so much anymore. And I just appreciate all that you did. My question is, it's kind of a housekeeping question. Did you give the couples the same questionnaire every time? Was there like a standard that you did with each of them?
No, that's a good question, but no, we didn't. We had a couple of things we wanted to find out about, like how do they fight? How do they meet? That kind of thing. Phil was very interested in what their parents' marriage was like. But other than that, we never sat down with a list of questions, and we didn't start with a question. We went to everybody's home, and they would put out, you know, some hummus and sausages and cheese and crackers and sometimes wine or lemonade, whatever. and we were in their home. It was like a double date, you know. It was a husband and wife facing another husband and wife, and we had a conversation. So the first couple of minutes, we'd talk about all kinds of things, you know, their garden, their furniture, whatever. And then little by little, we'd get into the conversation.
And I learned that if I said anything about our marriage, it just blew open a large door. And they went through it, and they started talking about their own marriage. It was really
well, I think it made them trust us, that we weren't reporters, you know. And let's face it, famous people are scared to death of the press, because you're always afraid that they're going to misunderstand you. They're going to not write it. You know, so many times I'll see something I've said in a newspaper, and it'll say, I said something, and then they add at the end, she insisted. I didn't insist, I just said it, you know. Or she lowered her eyes, giving you the impression that I was lying. You know, it had they do that. And so I think these people knew that we've been through that so many times that we were not going to do that to them. And we wanted
everybody. They knew you were
to,
writing a book, right? They knew you were writing a book.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Yeah,
What they were saying was going to be in the book.
They
right.
knew, yeah, they knew we were writing a book, and they knew, and we were taping the conversation, and it was a conversation. It could never, we couldn't have written it if we weren't in it too, because the conversation wouldn't have made any sense. You know, when we got the transcript back, we went through it together and said, oh, this is a good part, and this is a good part. We used a lot of it. You know, the book was supposed to be 350 pages long. It's over 600 pages long, because each story was so good. We thought they'd be about 2,500 words a piece. They're 5,000 words a piece. So they
Did you tell them you were coming for 4 hours when you came? Did you?
What did you say?
Did you tell them you were coming for 4 hours, or did you just say you'd be there for a couple hours?
Well,
yeah, we said a couple. We said.
Well, we thought we were going to be there for
90 minutes, we said.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
yes.
because they would ask. I mean, it was a lot of a process. First, we had to call them and ask them if they would do it. And we always asked to set up the call between the husband and wife and us, so that each of them, you know, had an equal say and an equal, you know, they had questions they wanted to ask. How are you doing it? Is it going to be video? Is it going to, you know, all that. There wasn't video, it was just audio. And we said about 90 minutes. They mostly lasted about 2.5, 3 hours. And
then I'd say, you know, we're sorry, but we have to go now.
it was fun. We really enjoyed it. And Phil was like that guy that did the show, the Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Phil was just, oh, right. Phil was enthralled with their houses. He just loved looking through the house.
Yeah, I got my guilty pleasure just looking around.
Emily,
See how they decorated and how many bedrooms they had, and it was really fun. And we made some new friends, people that we weren't friends with before. Some of the people were our very good friends, like Alan Alden, Billy Crystal, and all. But some of them we made some new friends, and that was nice too.
Emily, thank you very much for the question. We have another question from Joel, who says, what role has humor played in marriage and the longevity of a marriage?
A lot. It's a big deal. It's a very important deal. It helps if the other spouse understands your humor. And that's not always true. But, you know, people who can make other people laugh are valuable, in my opinion. They're the ones who, you know, spread the joy and make it easier to get along with another person for a prolonged period of time. No small issue during the pandemic. So I think humor is hugely important.
It really is. And a lot of people talked about that. That's one of their escapes. You know, is to laugh at what they've just been through. Or if there's an argument or something, to be able to laugh at it and say, oh, wasn't that stupid? And some people would say they'd be in the middle of a big fight and just start laughing because it was so crazy. So, I think that's a good thing. And we do make each other laugh. We have different kinds of sense of humor, but it tickles each of us, what the other one says.
We got a question from Susan who said, and you touched on this a little bit, but is asking about the commonalities that you heard from the 40 couples. Were there things that you heard over and over again that became very much a trend, if you will?
Well, I think what Phil said at the beginning is that they really wanted it to work. It wasn't like one person was dragging the other one along. These were two people who really wanted it to work and would go to whatever they needed to do, whether it was a therapist, whether it was friends, some talked to their family. They wanted it to work. But the other thing that I also noticed is that there was a lot of giving each other the benefit of the doubt, to not jump on what you think they said, but to just say, no, wait a minute, he wouldn't mean it like that. To just give it a second before you get a crushed feeling or a hurt feeling and act upon it. And that was something that a lot of them said, to step back and you got to have a little money in the bank, for each other. You can't think, this is a guy who loves me, and if he says this one little thing, I can't behave like he doesn't love me now. You know what I mean? You have to have a little bit of money in that bank, a little bit of credit. And so you need to step back. And also a physical life, sexuality, and even not just sex, S-E-X, but cuddling and touching and affection.
Who said tushy to tushy?
Judy Viors. They have a double bed. We have a king size bed. I don't know how the heck they make it in a double bed. I'd be on the floor half the time. When we stay in a hotel and it's a double bed, it's really hard. But they have a double bed. They've been married 60 years. And she said, when you're sleeping tushy to tushy, it's hard to be mad at each other. So there is that thing about the physicality of marriage, the hugging in the morning or the hugging at night, the touching is very important. And a lot of people don't do that. They do when they're having sex, but they don't during the day. Just, pat the other one on the butt or give them a little squeeze or hold their hand, something that there's a reason that we have this one person. You don't touch other people. If I put my hand on my husband's thigh, I would not do that with any other man in the world. And he the same. So there's that intimacy of the bodies that is not about sex. And that's a lot of people spoke about that.
Jam One has a question. You're gonna bring him in, Rachel? I think Rachel's muted.
Can you hear me?
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Thank you. So you touched on this earlier about, and my husband and I are like total opposites, but our ethics are the same, 100% the same. So how important did that come up in your interviews with these people? Because it seems to me if your ethics, you don't share ethics and your belief in things, how different, I'm interested in the you said you interviewed the Carville.
Yeah, that's a good example of the importance of your question. People wanted, how in the world does Mary Matlin and James Carville go through life when they're such politically opposite people? She had a good answer to that.
Yeah, actually, he was the one who said, politics, our political differences are just one part of our life. We have children, we have families, we have a home, we hike, we have barbecues, we read books, we travel together. He said, you can't agree on everything, and we don't agree on politics, and that's the way we make our living. But that's just one part of our life. So it isn't, you don't have to sing in the same choir on every issue, but the issues in which you see the world, as I was saying earlier about what's good and bad, what's fair and unfair, what's acceptable and unacceptable, those they have solidly. They really do. She completely trusts him with her life and her children, and he does her too. And that's the important thing. Were you saying that you and your husband are complete opposites? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, I'm noisy. He's quiet. You know, he's the powder. I'm Italian. You know, I'm in your face with that stuff. But when it comes to our values and how we want to raise the kids, we've never been off on that. It's always been, 100% dead on. And so when you were dealing with all these other couples, I wonder how often that came up.
Yes, well, a lot of couples. Jamie Lee Curtis and her husband, she said they are completely opposite. We said, and what? She said everything. In fact, they formed a company, a word I don't remember, it starts with an S. It looks like synergy, but it's SY something, and it means opposites. They are so opposite in every way that they approach life, but their value systems are the same. The way they raise their children, that's the same. But the way their personalities are, he is a complete introvert. She is not, and like that. You know, she doesn't want to go he doesn't want to go out. She does want to go out. George Stephanopoulos and Ali Wentworth are like that. She loves to go out. He does not like to go out. So they found a way around that. He said, we decided we don't have to be a professional couple. You know, there are things we want to do together, but sometimes she wants to go to a big party. I said, I don't want to go. And so she knows she can go. She'll go and I won't go. Or I'm going to go to some stodgy thing that she doesn't want to go to. I go to it. You know, he said, or I'll go to a thing with her, 20 minutes I want to leave. And I'll look at her and I can tell she doesn't want to leave. So we look at each other and she knows I'm going to leave and she's going to stay a while. That's another thing that Carville said, and he's one too. He likes to get to a party, stay 20 minutes and go home. Mary likes to stay at the party all night. He said the greatest thing for a marriage is Uber and Lyft. You get a Lyft home and she can stay there all night long. And that's grown. That's being very mature. When we first started together, I work really hard for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. So I'm constantly doing fundraisers and going to banquets and stuff. And in the beginning, I would say to him, well, you have to come with me. It's for St. Jude. You have to come with me. And finally, after a while, I thought, why does this poor guy have to go with me? This is my commitment. This is my family's dream. It's not his dream. So he'll come. If it's a really big thing, he'll come to it. Obviously, if I'm hosting it, he'll come to it. But he doesn't have to go to every single one of these events. And so that's something that after a while, you give your partner a break. They don't have to be you, And I think that eases a lot of tension.
Your father, Danny Thomas, at your wedding said, I not only gained a son-in-law, but I gained a fundraiser.
Right.
Yeah, he did say that.
He said, I didn't lose a daughter, I gained a fundraiser. Yeah. Phil and my dad got along really well. It was very, very cute. I so enjoyed. They're very much alike. I think I said that Phil was born in Cleveland and my dad was born in Toledo. They're right on the same ramp on the same highway. I always think of that when I'm on that highway and I see those two signs, Toledo and Cleveland, and I think, wow, I didn't go very far at all from Toledo to Cleveland. But they had a similar, background. Nice Midwestern middle class bringing up, and I think that it really made them good friends, and it made them very good, decent men. I think a lot of women, I'm one of them, marry men like their dad, and I married a man that's like my dad. And he's a decent guy. I know who he is. He does not surprise me in any bad ways. I know who he is. And that's a big thing, it's a really big thing.
A final question before our time together ends, but I would think once you do the interviews, you go out, you interview 40 couples and you're ready to go. Do you just say to each other, God, I hope they stay together until the book comes out?
That's funny.
As an Irish Catholic, I worried about that. We worry about a lot of things. But yes, that did occur to me.
It did not occur to me.
Well,
You worry about that stuff.
Like the woman who said she and her husband are opposite. We really are. I mean, I'm the glass half full and he's the glass half empty. That's for sure. He is, the Irish have that black doom thing about him. One time we were driving somewhere, we laughed about this forever. We were on our way to Connecticut and there was this beautiful grove of sunflowers. And Phil said to me, look at them, look, they're going to be dead in 2 weeks. And I said, can't you just enjoy them now? Why do you have to think about death? That's the Irish. I would never think that. I said, wow, look at them. Let's go pick a few. Well, they'll be dead in 2 weeks. I said, okay. And that's very Irish. That's not Italian and Lebanese.
No, that's a total Irish thing. My wife and I were in a movie, and the trailer comes up and it says, coming spring 2022. And I just looked and I said, I hope we're alive then.
Oh, God.
You're
really Irish. Oh, my
yeah,
Lord.
Well, and we should have mentioned this at the beginning. Even though Phil and I share a last name, we are not related. We could very well be related.
You
but
very well could be.
We're not. But Phil,
I'll behave if you will.
But I will say, and I've had the great fortune of telling this in person to him. I've been in this business for 30 years, and being an interviewer, being a talk show host, and Phil Donahue was my absolute idol. There's nobody who has meant more to me in my career. There's nobody that has meant more to me of the guiding light and showing what somebody could do in this profession. And I just thank you so much. Much as Rachel told about the importance of you, Marlo, in her life. I can't thank you enough for all that you've done in this.
That's nice. Thank you so much.
It's really beautiful. To both
kind.
of you, I thank you both so much for being with us.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks to everybody who showed up and asked questions and all. It's been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for coming.
Well, the name of the new book, and it's really just great. It is What Makes a Marriage Last. It's published by Harper. Thank you both so much for being with us. What a delight.
Thank you.
Thank
Be
you.
well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.